The chill of the auction block seeped into Ilara's bones, a cold far deeper than the biting November air. Sold. Like a barren cow, like a broken plough. Her stepmother, Lavinia, had seen to that, her voice dripping venom as she'd recounted Ilara's shame, her belly swelling with a child of no name, a blight on their respectable family. The whispers and scornful eyes of her village had been a torment, but this public degradation, was a descent into a new kind of hell. Men appraised her, their gazes lingering on her rounded form, not with desire, but with calculation or disdain. Hope had withered within her months ago, leaving only a hollow ache and a fierce, protective instinct for the unborn life nestled beneath her heart. She was 20, her spirit bruised but not entirely broken, though it felt perilously close. Who would want damaged goods, a woman carrying another's babe, a constant reminder of a hidden scandal? The auctioneer's words were a dull roar, until a quiet voice cut through the grim proceedings. "I'll take her." He was a tall man, weathered by sun and wind, his clothes clean but plain. Loneliness clung to him like the scent of pine and earth. Caleb McDowell, a rancher from the high country, a widower whose own heart echoed with a quiet desolation. He didn't look at her with the leering contempt of the others, but with a strange, unreadable sorrow in his deep-set eyes. He paid Lavinia's price, a sum that felt both insultingly small and impossibly large. As he helped her, gently, onto the seat of his wagon, the question screamed in Ilara's mind, a silent, desperate plea against the vast, uncaring sky: could this stark exchange, this purchase born of one woman's cruelty and another man's solitude, possibly lead to anything but more pain? Or was this stranger, with his calloused hands and sorrowful eyes, an answer to a prayer she'd forgotten she knew how to make? The emptiness of her past seemed to stretch into an equally barren future, and she clutched her worn shawl tighter, the fragile life within her the only anchor in a sea of despair. This was not rescue, she told herself, it was merely a change of masters. Yet, as the wagon wheels began to turn, carrying her away from everything she had ever known, a tiny, treacherous seed of something akin to curiosity, perhaps even a nascent flicker of hope, dared to stir in the desolate landscape of her heart. The journey to Caleb McDowell's ranch was long, measured by the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels and the vast, indifferent silence of the plains. Ilara huddled under the rough blanket Caleb had provided, her apprehension a tight knot in her chest. He spoke little, his words reserved for the horses or brief comments on the terrain, yet his silence was not unkind. It was a heavy, thoughtful quiet, unlike the suffocating silences of her stepmother's house, which had always been thick with unspoken reproaches. When they finally arrived, the ranch was starker, more isolated than she could have imagined. A sturdy log house stood sentinel against a backdrop of rolling hills that bled into distant, snow-capped mountains. A curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, a lonely signal in the vast wilderness. It was rustic, undeniably, but there was an air of honest labor about it, a cleanliness that spoke of pride. Caleb helped her down, his touch surprisingly gentle on her arm. "The house ain't much," he said, his voice raspy from disuse, "but it's warm. You can have the spare room. Not the barn, not a pallet by the hearth. A room of her own." It was small, with a simple bed and a single window looking out onto the endless land, but it felt like a sanctuary. He showed her the kitchen, the well, the necessities, his movements economical, his explanations brief. There were no children, she noted with a pang of mixed relief and sorrow. The loneliness here was palpable, a living entity that seemed to inhabit the very timbers of the house. He prepared a simple meal of stew and bread, and they ate in near silence, the crackling fire the loudest sound. He didn't press her with questions, didn't pry into her past. He simply treated her with a quiet, unassuming decency that was more disarming than any overt kindness might have been. Ilara observed him covertly, this man who now, in some unfathomable way, owned her. His face was lined, telling tales of hardship and solitude, but his eyes, when they chanced to meet hers, held no malice, only a profound weariness and an unexpected flicker of something she dared not name. Was it compassion? Or merely the pragmatism of a man who had acquired a responsibility? As she lay in the small, clean bed that night, the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness outside her window, a fragile sense of safety began to settle over her, as foreign and tentative as the first spring thaw. In the days that followed, Ilara moved through the small cabin like a shadow, her initial fear slowly giving way to a cautious routine. She had always found solace in work, in the rhythm of domestic tasks that anchored her thoughts and kept despair at bay. The house, though clean, bore the unmistakable signs of a man living alone. She began, hesitantly at first, to impose a gentle order. She mended Caleb's worn shirts, the needle a familiar comfort in her fingers. She aired out the musty linens, swept the floors until they shone faintly in the sparse sunlight, and coaxed the dying embers in the hearth back to vigorous life each morning. Her cooking, simple but wholesome, filled the cabin with aromas that had long been absent. She found a forgotten patch of earth near the cabin, choked with weeds, and with Caleb's unspoken permission, began to clear it, dreaming of a small kitchen garden come spring, a splash of green against the browns and greys of the landscape. Caleb watched her, his gaze often lingering when he thought she wasn't looking. He saw the quiet efficiency of her hands, the resilience that shone through her weariness, the gentle way she moved, mindful of the life she carried. He noted the subtle changes in the cabin, the brighter hearth, the mended curtains, the scent of baking bread, and a quiet warmth began to thaw the frozen corners of his own heart. He, in turn, ensured she had enough firewood, that the water buckets were always full. He'd leave a freshly picked apple on the table some mornings, or a piece of dried jerky, small, unspoken offerings. They spoke little, but a language of shared tasks and mutual respect began to form between them. He never alluded to the circumstances of her arrival, never treated her as anything less than a person deserving of dignity. One evening, as she darned a sock by the firelight, he spoke of his late wife, Martha, his voice soft with memory. She loved this land, he said, his gaze distant. Always said it had a wild beauty to it. Ilara listened, her heart aching with a sympathy that surprised her. In his quiet grief, she sensed a shared understanding of loss, though their losses were vastly different. A fragile trust began to weave itself between them, delicate as a spider's thread, yet surprisingly strong. The ranch was still a lonely place, but it no longer felt quite so desolate. The changing seasons mirrored the subtle shifts within the small cabin on Caleb McDowell's ranch. As winter's grip tightened on the land, a tentative warmth began to bloom between Ilara and Caleb. His initial reserve, born of years of solitude and unspoken grief, slowly softened in the face of her quiet presence and unwavering diligence. He found himself anticipating the scent of her baking, the low hum of her voice as she sometimes sang softly to herself, the gentle order she brought to his once chaotic home. For Ilara, the constant fear that had been her companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a fragile sense of security. Caleb's steady, respectful demeanor was a balm to her wounded spirit. He asked nothing of her but what she willingly gave, and in return, he offered a sanctuary, a quiet kindness that was more precious than gold. The necessity of a trip to the nearby settlement of Redemption for supplies loomed as the snows began to fall in earnest. Ilara dreaded it, the thought of facing curious eyes and wagging tongues, a cold fist in her stomach. Her condition was more apparent now, her belly a gentle swell beneath her shawl. Caleb seemed to understand her unspoken fears. "You don't have to come if you'd rather not," he said one morning, his gaze steady on hers. "But we're low on flour and salt," she swallowed, her gaze dropping to her hands. I should go. I might see some fabric for the babe," he simply nodded. "I'll keep you by my side." The journey to Redemption was tense. When they arrived, the town seemed to hold its breath. Whispers followed them like shadows as they moved from the general store to the smithy. Ilara kept her eyes downcast, her arm linked through Caleb's, his presence a solid shield. She felt the stares, imagined the cruel speculations. Then, Mrs. Henderson, the town's most notorious purveyor of gossip, approached, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Well, Caleb McDowell. Didn't expect to see you with company." Her gaze lingered pointedly on Ilara's abdomen. Caleb's grip tightened ever so slightly on Ilara's arm. "This is Ilara," he said, his voice calm but firm, a distinct note of warning beneath the civility. "She's staying at my ranch." Mrs. Henderson sniffed, but Caleb's unwavering stare and protective stance seemed to quell her more pointed inquiries. Ilara, though her cheeks burned, managed a polite nod, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the woman's blatant curiosity. As they left the town, the setting sun casting long shadows, Caleb said nothing of the encounter, but his quiet solidarity spoke volumes. He had not flinched, had not hidden her. He had stood by her. And in that simple act, the fragile shoots of affection within Ilara's heart pushed a little further towards the light. As her pregnancy advanced, Ilara found her days shaped by the gentle rhythms of awaiting new life. The morning sickness had passed, replaced by a burgeoning fullness and the occasional flutter of movement within her, a constant, intimate reminder of the miracle she carried. Caleb's concern for her well-being was quiet but profound. He took over the heavier tasks without a word, ensured she rested, and often left small comforts for her, a warm brick for her feet on cold nights, a cushion for her back as she sat by the fire. Their conversations, once sparse, now often drifted towards the coming child. Ilara confessed her fears, the pain of childbirth, the uncertainty of raising a child in such isolation, the lingering shadow of her past and what it might mean for her baby. Caleb listened patiently, his presence a steady reassurance. "This child will be welcomed here, Ilara," he said one evening, his voice raspy with an emotion she was beginning to recognize as tenderness. "This ranch, it's been too quiet for too long." A child's laughter would be a fine sound. His words painted a picture of a future she hadn't dared to imagine, a future where her baby was not a source of shame, but of joy. One afternoon, while reaching for a jar on a high shelf, Ilara felt a sudden, sharp pain low in her belly, followed by a wave of dizziness. She cried out, clutching the shelf for support. Caleb was across the room in an instant, his face etched with alarm. "What is it? What's wrong?" He helped her to a chair, his hand surprisingly gentle as he eased her down. The fear in his eyes was a mirror of her own. "Just a pain," she whispered, tears welling. "It's past now," but the scare lingered. He insisted she rest, hovering nearby, his usual stoicism replaced by an anxious solicitude. He brewed her a weak tea and sat with her, his large, calloused hand resting near hers on the table. The incident, though frightening, served to strip away another layer of formality between them. In that shared moment of fear, the unspoken bond, the growing affection they both felt but had not voiced, became undeniable. The line between their unconventional arrangement and genuine, heartfelt care had irrevocably blurred. This child, conceived in sorrow and secrecy, was becoming a bridge, drawing two lonely souls together in an unexpected journey towards hope and healing. The silence that settled between them was no longer empty, but filled with a quiet understanding and the shared anticipation of a new life. The winter winds howled around the small cabin like hungry wolves, piling snowdrifts against the door and windows, isolating them further from the already distant world. It was during one such blizzard, fierce and unrelenting, that nature decided to test their resilience. The storm struck with little warning, a maelstrom of ice and wind that threatened to tear the roof from their small sanctuary. Caleb knew the livestock in the lean-to shed were vulnerable. "I have to check on them," he yelled over the roar of the wind, already pulling on his heaviest coat. Ilara, despite her advanced pregnancy and the fear that clawed at her, insisted on helping. "I can hold the lantern, at least," she argued, her chin set with a determination that surprised even herself. Together, they battled their way through the blinding snow to the shed. The wind tore at them, threatening to rip the lantern from Ilara's grasp, but she held firm, her light a small beacon in the raging chaos. Caleb fought to secure a loose beam, his muscles straining, while Ilara shielded the precious flame, her own discomfort forgotten in the urgency of the moment. They worked in a desperate, unspoken harmony, their movements efficient, their reliance on each other absolute. Hours later, soaked and shivering but victorious, they stumbled back into the relative warmth of the cabin. The immediate danger had passed, the livestock secured. They collapsed near the hearth, the shared crisis stripping away any remaining pretense. Huddled together for warmth, the silence was thick with unspoken emotions. Caleb looked at Ilara, her face pale but resolute, her eyes shining in the firelight. He saw not the bought woman, but a pillar of strength, a partner who had faced the storm alongside him without complaint. A profound respect, mingled with a deeper, warmer emotion, swelled in his chest. "You were brave tonight, Ilara," he said, his voice rough. She merely leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and exhaustion that spoke volumes. The storm outside continued its assault, but within the cabin, a different kind of storm had been weathered, one that forged their bond in the crucible of shared adversity. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the snow-caked windows, it illuminated a scene of quiet intimacy, a testament to their growing strength as a unit. The world outside might be harsh and unforgiving, but within these four walls, something resilient and beautiful was taking root. The blizzard eventually subsided, leaving the world blanketed in a pristine, silent white. The shared ordeal had woven a new intimacy into the fabric of Elara and Caleb's relationship, a comfortable reliance that felt more akin to marriage than their unconventional beginnings suggested. However, the peace was short-lived. A thaw brought riders, and with them, news that chilled Elara to the bone. A letter, passed through several hands from her old village, arrived addressed to Caleb. It was from Lavinia, her stepmother. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs as Caleb read it, his brow furrowed. "She knows you're here," he said grimly. She implies you stole something from her before you left, and that your child is illegitimate in a way that defames her family name further. She threatens to come, to bring the sheriff if necessary." The old fear, cold and sickening, washed over Elara. Lavinia's malice knew no bounds. She could picture her stepmother's triumphant sneer, her poisonous words twisting the truth, turning any newfound peace to ash. "She won't rest until she's ruined me completely," Elara whispered, her hands instinctively going to her swollen belly. But then, a new resolve hardened her gaze. She was no longer the frightened, helpless girl Lavinia had tormented. She had found a measure of strength here, in this quiet man's kindness, in the promise of the life she carried. Days later, Lavinia arrived, not with the sheriff, but with Mr. Hemlock, the pompous, self-righteous elder from Elara's former village, a man to whom Lavinia had likely spun a tale of woe and betrayal. They found Elara outside, tending to the small, hopeful shoots in her thawing garden patch, Caleb nearby mending a fence line. "There you are, you ungrateful wretch!" Lavinia's voice was as shrill and grating as Elara remembered. "Stealing away in the night, shaming us all." Elara straightened, her hand resting on her belly, her gaze meeting her stepmother's without flinching. "I stole nothing, Lavinia. You sold me. And this child is a blessing, not a shame." Caleb stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Elara, a silent, immovable shield. "Elara is under my protection," he said, his voice low and steady. "And this child will be my child. She is to be my wife." Lavinia's face contorted with rage, but Elara's newfound courage and Caleb's unwavering declaration left her sputtering. Mr. Hemlock, looking uncomfortable and clearly out of his depth in the face of Caleb's quiet certainty and Elara's calm defiance, began to stammer apologies. The confrontation was brief but potent. Lavinia, her power diminished, her venomous accusations falling flat against the wall of their united front, eventually retreated, defeated and fuming. As their wagon disappeared down the track, Elara leaned against Caleb, a shaky sigh escaping her. The past had come calling, but it had found her changed, no longer its victim. The confrontation with Lavinia, though unsettling, had served a vital purpose. It had solidified Elara and Caleb's unspoken commitment, paving the way for the future. Spring bloomed across the high country, painting the hills in tender greens and wildflowers, a vibrant symbol of new beginnings. Elara's time was near, and a quiet anticipation settled over the ranch. One cool evening, as the scent of pine and damp earth drifted through the open window, Elara felt the first unmistakable pangs of labor. Fear, sharp and primal, mingled with a profound excitement. Caleb, alerted by her sharp intake of breath, was instantly by her side, his usual stoicism replaced by a tender anxiety. "It's time," she whispered, her eyes wide. He had prepared for this moment, enlisting the help of Martha, a kind widow from a neighboring ranch who had experience as a midwife. He'd ridden out to fetch her at the first sign, leaving Elara with assurances and a simmering pot of broth. Hours later, as Martha's calm voice guided her and Caleb's hand gripped hers, Elara rode the waves of pain, her focus narrowing to the immense, elemental task before her. Caleb never left her side, his presence a rock in the storm of her labor. He wiped her brow, spoke words of encouragement, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe, fear, and an overwhelming love that needed no words. The night was long, filled with effort and whispered prayers. Then, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, a new sound filled the small cabin, the strong, lusty cry of a newborn. A son. Ilara, exhausted but euphoric, gazed at the tiny, perfect being cradled in her arms. Tears streamed down Caleb's face as he looked at the child, then at Ilara, his heart overflowing. A son, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. A son. You've given me a son, Ilara. Martha, smiling gently, cleaned the babe and wrapped him snugly. They decided on a name together, Samuel, meaning God has heard, a testament to Caleb's long-held prayers, and Ethan, meaning strong and enduring, for the resilience that had brought them all to this moment. Holding Samuel Ethan McDowell, Ilara felt a profound sense of peace and completion. The shadows of her past seemed to recede, banished by the fierce, bright love for this child and the man who had become her anchor, her husband in all but name. This small, screaming infant was not just a baby, he was hope incarnate, the embodiment of a new life forged from loneliness and courage, a testament to the enduring power of kindness and the unexpected blossoming of love. The arrival of Samuel Ethan transformed the quiet ranch into a place with new life. His cries, his gurgles, the soft scent of him, filled the spaces once occupied by silence and solitude. Caleb, a man of few words, found himself utterly captivated by his son, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender as he touched the baby's soft cheek or simply watched him sleep. For Ilara, motherhood was an all-encompassing wave of love and devotion, healing wounds she hadn't known were still so raw. One sun-drenched afternoon, as she sat on the porch swing Caleb had built, nursing Samuel, Caleb approached, a small, clumsily picked bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. He sat beside her, watching his son with a gentle smile before turning to her, his expression earnest. "Ilara," he began, his voice a little rough, this ain't how things are usually done, I know. But you're the heart of this home now. You're Samuel's mother. And I love you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Will you marry me, Ilara? Properly, before God and whoever cares to witness." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Oh, Caleb," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding was simple, held in the small, sun-dappled clearing by the creek where Samuel had been conceived in spirit, if not in flesh. Martha attended, along with a few other kindly neighbors who had come to respect Caleb and admire Ilara's quiet strength. Ilara wore a dress of pale blue, a color that mirrored the vast sky above them, her eyes shining brighter than any jewel. Caleb, in his best, though still plain, suit, looked at her with an adoration that made her heart swell. The circuit preacher spoke of love, resilience, and new beginnings, his words echoing the journey they had undertaken. Even Mrs. Henderson from Redemption made an appearance, presenting Ilara with a slightly lopsided but clearly heartfelt hand-stitched quilt for the baby. Her gaze, once sharp with suspicion, now held a grudging respect. The town, slowly but surely, was coming to see Ilara not as the bought woman but as Caleb McDowell's wife, a devoted mother, and a woman of quiet grace and profound inner strength. As Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a symbol of their enduring commitment, Ilara knew her transformation was complete. She was no longer defined by her past sorrows or societal judgments, but by the love that enveloped her, the family she had built, and the unshakable sense of belonging she had found in this wild, beautiful place, and in this good man's steadfast heart. Years passed, weaving a tapestry of shared joys and quiet contentment on the McDowell ranch. Samuel Ethan grew from a babe into a sturdy, inquisitive boy with his father's thoughtful eyes and his mother's gentle smile. He toddled after Caleb through the fields, his small hand clutching his father's larger one, learning the rhythms of the land that was his birthright. Another child, a daughter named Hope, with Ilara's dark hair and Caleb's quiet determination, soon filled the cabin with her bright laughter, her presence a constant reminder of the blessings that had unexpectedly blossomed from a beginning fraught with despair. The ranch prospered under Caleb's diligent hand and Ilara's resourceful management. Her garden flourished, providing not only for their family but often for neighbors in need. The small log cabin, once a symbol of solitude, now resonated with warmth, love, and the cheerful chaos of a growing family. Elara, once a woman shadowed by shame and fear, now moved with a quiet confidence, her inner strength a beacon that drew others to her. She was the heart of their home, her kindness and wisdom sought by many in the small community that had once judged her. Her past was not forgotten, but it no longer held any power over her. It was merely the preface to a story of redemption and profound love. Caleb watched her, his love deepening with each passing year. He had sought a helper, perhaps a companion in his loneliness, and had found a soulmate, a woman whose courage and resilience had not only saved herself but had also resurrected his own dormant heart. He often found himself marveling at the path their lives had taken, at the improbable miracle of their family. They were pillars of the small redemption community now, their past an almost forgotten whisper, overshadowed by their present integrity and the undeniable love that bound their family. The judgmental stares had long faded, replaced by nods of respect and genuine smiles. Elara often sat on the porch in the evenings, Samuel and Hope playing nearby, Caleb beside her, his arm around her shoulders. She would look out at the vast expanse of the land, the setting sun painting the sky in breathtaking colors, and a profound sense of peace would settle over her. Her journey had been arduous, marked by injustice and fear, but it had led her here, to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have ever dared to dream. The lonely rancher had indeed bought a pregnant woman sold by her stepmother, but in doing so, he had not acquired property, he had found a wife, a mother for his children, and a love that had healed them both, giving him not just the son he'd prayed for, but a future illuminated by unwavering hope and enduring peace.